So welcome to Agile Answers, Andy Brandt here, and today it's a different format because we have a guest, Rob Maher. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Rob?
Maher.
Maher. Okay. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the Agile Answers. Rob is a fellow PST at Scrum.org, but he's also a guy who has lots of experience in Agile and in Scrum in particular, going more than 10 years back. Maybe you could tell a few words about yourself.
Yes, so I was born in the UK, where I started learning about Scrum. I moved to New Zealand 15 years ago, and I've been working in Scrum and Agile really ever since. I work predominantly across New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, a little bit in India, so an awful lot of travel, in a lot of large organisations. So for whatever reason, I find myself in financial services companies, telcos, lots of big Scrum implementations.
Okay, so that's a unique experience. So we'll try to dive into that and tap that experience with questions. So let's start with the first questions, which came from a Scrum Master at the company we worked with. So how much should I, as a Scrum Master, get involved in all this stuff related to firing people, performance evaluations, evaluating people, maybe some pre-firing criticism, stuff like that? Should I deliver the news? Should I stay away from that? Should I tell managers if they ask me to evaluate the team or particular members of the team? What would be your advice?
My advice would be do none of it. Isolate yourself from as much of the line management responsibility as you can, unless you're the line manager as well, because I want to focus on the team and be the one point that the team can look to for independent help, knowing that this isn't a part of a performance review conversation, I'm not being appraised, and I am really only there to help the team be successful. As soon as you change that role into something else, then I think the team look at you differently, and you have to adapt your behaviours to try and suit. Ultimately, you're trying to serve two masters. You're trying to serve the organisational hierarchy as well as serve your team. I think that's very difficult to do both at the same time.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the managers, the line managers, they are still there, and they are hungry for some material to base their evaluations and then their personal decisions on. And they usually come to Scrum Masters for help. Mm-hmm.
They come to Scrum Master as a proxy for actually interacting with the team. So, there's lots of schools of management that talk about, getting up and walking around and go see, and techniques that basically say the way to manage is by being present. So if you want to see what's happening with your team, go to your team and spend enough time with them that being there isn't abnormal. Often managers hear about this go see technique and say, okay, so I'll go and have a walk around and see my team. And the manager comes and everyone sits up a little bit straighter and types a bit faster and takes their headphones off, and then the manager goes away in 10 minutes and we'll slump back to relax. So the technique only really works if you're present that long enough that it's normal. Well, the manager's here again, he's always here. And then normal behaviours carry on, and again, ambient noise is where you pick up what's going on. Who's really contributing? Who seems to be helping other people regularly? Who's showing the right kind of behaviours that I want to recognise? That for me is the way to do promotions, line management, deal with behaviours that perhaps are not moving in the right direction. Not looking for a proxy in my Scrum Master because I haven't got time to go and spend with my team.
Okay, so for the sake of one of our Scrum Masters, who I'm sure will be viewing this, so he got into a situation when he learned that someone on his team is going to be fired, and in his judgment that wasn't necessarily bad decision, but he decided to go and tell that person. He asked the manager wasn't very, but he was accommodating. I just asked, are you sure you want to do that? Okay, if you are positive it's going to turn out good, go and do that. And then it turned out it wasn't the best of ideas. So how would you handle a situation like that? You learn that someone is going to be fired from your team. What do you do?
That's a tough question. I think by going to tell them that they're going to be fired, I'd have to sit and think about what's the best outcome that can come from that conversation. So what am I trying to achieve by having that conversation? Is it to try and turn that person around, to try and say, hey, this is, we're at a really serious moment now, and the organisation's looking at potentially not moving forwards with you. Is there anything we can do to change that? But if it's truly the organisation's made their choice, and it's a matter of communication with the team member, that's not what I see as my role, to go and break the bad news if there's really no alternative. I think it's different if the organisation comes to you, rightly or wrongly, and says, if this person doesn't change, we think they're going to be fired, and you have a part in coming up with that change. That's a role I've been pulled into before as a Scrum Master, and I've sat with the line manager and said, well, what needs to be true in order for this person to keep going, and then you maybe sit down with them. But again, that's not where I want to go, take that role, unless it's forced upon me.
Okay,
Yep.
so that's exactly what I was suggesting when we were speaking, which is, think what were your motives actually when doing that. I mean, what you wanted to achieve, or were you just trying to be a nice guy, or were you trying to help the team, or maybe that person? Or what was the desired outcome, or why you were doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thanks for that. Let's move to the other one.
Okay.
Which yesterday you got me curious about nurturing the so-called communities of practice. Now, this is something that pops up frequently, a need for some kind of vertical or cross-team body, team, maybe not team, maybe a group, maybe a circle that discusses usually technical matters related to one of the layers in a system.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do I nurture them? How do I prevent that from being 2 meetings within a month and then all dissipating and going back to normal, which is either chaotic or a senior architect calling all the shots in this place, or something like that?
I think you've given good examples of what can commonly happen. If they are too structured, it almost ends up like a local council meeting, and someone has their agenda and minutes, and it gets very formal very quickly, and you get a title because you're running it, and no one really wants to be there, and they're very dry events. The alternative is they get started with great excitement and gusto, and then dry up very, very quickly. For me, the best models of collaborative sharing of technology and techniques is the open source community. Mm-hmm. So I see it very much as you're looking for people to be volunteers inside your organisation. It's not about giving people incentives, bonuses, we're going to give you a flashy title, we're going to give you extra money. It needs to be passion. Right? Certain people have a passion to share and collaborate, and certain people don't. So if you have a development community centered around a particular technology, let's say we've got Java development community and we want to build a community of practice, some people will participate naturally, some people will not participate naturally, and that's okay. But you're looking for the natural volunteers. So I think finding those people with a passion, and then you really just want to give them a stage. And what I mean by give them a stage is get all the friction out of their way. So when do we meet? When do we have some time to meet? Lunchtime's a great way to get started. Lay on some brown bag lunches, give people just a bit of space to get started. Recognise it in your organisation enough that it has a voice. What I mean by that is take recommendations and actions out of that community seriously. So this isn't just people meeting to do their knitting. This is this community that is investing their own time, right, their own time and passion, saying to you, hey, we need to make these changes in the way that we currently do Java across the organisation. That has to carry some weight. And I think as soon as people see that their voice carries weight, again, it reinforces this notion of community, and that the community is valued and nurtured by the organisation. So if you truly have people with no interest in learning, and again, learning anything, communities should be very, very horizontal. It's not to say, as a Java dev, I'm not welcome or invited to things like the automated testing community, but it's whatever it is that kind of I'm interested in at a particular point in time.
Yeah, or to make it more radical, a graphic design community.
Anything, and so there's hack days and things that are becoming more common now. I really like the internal conference idea. So again, organisations show some willing, give up half a day, even a day is becoming more common in organisations, and people will come and just like an external conference, session proposals, selection, and they'll talk about, at home I code in some other language and functional programming, and here's why it's a great thing. You're trying to foster a learning mindset. and what it is that's learning is what it is that people are learning and teaching isn't actually the important thing. It's the fact that learning becomes valued, and that fosters the community feel of, well, that's kind of interesting. I never really thought of that. It may not be something that excites me personally, but you've just prompted me to think about something that I am interested in. Maybe I'll go and spend a bit of time learning about that, and we'll come back and do a talk on it. So it's the culture of learning is what you're trying to build, rather than a box around. All our Java developers should be meeting every Thursday, and coming up with new coding standards. I think having a really clear line between the community effort, in terms of the community of practice, and organisational artefacts that we need. I don't want my Java community being told to come up with Java coding standards. I can't think of anything more boring.
So that's interesting what you are saying, because I quite frequently see communities of practice being set up, or maybe that label being applied to a group that is expected to, for example, keep the Java code more or less the same and readable across the teams, or keep, PHP code or standards of automated testing the same across teams, and that function is definitely needed. But from what you say, this is not what communities of practice are for.
I don't see them having, a governance focus like that. Again, that if Java is what excites me, it's my passion. Standardization and governance, it's completely. It's not where my passion is, right? That's the most boring thing I can possibly think of to focus on. So actually, what I want them to be focused on is, how do we do what we do better? How do we share ideas that are working well in individual pockets across a broader audience? And that's about convincing people it's the best thing to do, not hitting them with a stick saying, well, I'm the one in charge and you must do what everyone else does. So a good example I see recently is an automated testing community of practice. And they have organically come together and said, we're a bunch of sensible automated testing tools. These ones fit in our context really well. If you use something else, we want you to come to the community and tell us why. That is the only governance they've applied. So they basically said, find something else that's better than these, come and tell us why. That's the only rule we've put in place.
So, but they have established effectively a bit of technical governance, a rule, which is part of what you said earlier about taking the output of those groups, of those communities seriously. So they might serve that function, even though it might not be an explicit expectation put on them. Because usually that's the explicit expectation put on such a group, which is, you Java developers from all the teams, you are supposed to talk to one another and establish a common ground.
Yes.
Now, how we would advise to handle stuff like that? Would you do it like as a byproduct of communities of practice, like you describe, or would you establish a different forum for that?
The problem with mandating uniformity is it encourages lowest common denominator thinking. But the only way we can get uniformity is bring everyone down to the level of the lowest. And that's never the right solution. So it's, how do we get creative uniformity, right? How do we get close enough that we accommodate the edge cases in our organisation? And that's both in terms of teams' ability, because some teams frankly are up here, some teams are up here, and some teams are up here. Not everyone should be using these tools, and not everyone should be using these tools. And so it's got to be organic out of the community. If I set up a community, people have charters, they're very popular, right? We need a charter for our community. Coding standards will be met, governance will be applied. I just killed that community before they even started. If that's the purpose, what you want to set up is a committee. Committees have different people than communities. And the naming is very explicit.
Yeah.
You find committees draw people who like rules and structure and governance. Communities drive volunteers. If you want conformity, form a committee.
How would in one organization you would probably want both, because you need some level of uniformity, because what you want all the developers to be able to read the code in a given language. It should be readable, it should be more or less understandable, follow the same patterns, for example. And at the same time, you obviously don't want everyone to think uniformly, you don't want to kill that. So how to balance that? Because it's a matter of a balance, I think.
I would say high trust organisations don't need the committee. The same artefacts come out of the community, but I think lots of organisations already have technical structures in place, technical leadership, accountability, that the committee role is served. What they're missing is the community. They have lots of documentation on the approved way to do things. And so that's really the missing piece. What's always missing is the community aspect. It's actually the new innovative thinking the learning never comes out of committees. Committees are just conformity, right? This is what we're interested in. So I think you nurture the community. The committee's already there. They look after themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I have this situation in one company where they created cross-functional teams, which are called squads, and those teams started to operate pretty well over the last year.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are still now horizontal component structures which still have their managers, the technical leaders for each layer, and they are still in place, and they are somehow lost what would their role be, and right now their role is mainly in committee.
Yeah.
They used to distribute work. They don't do that anymore because the teams themselves pushed against that, and they said no work that is not from the product backlog.
Yeah.
So they are now in this committee role, and I was thinking how to transition that to a more community-oriented or communities of practice-oriented organization, because the organization is not that big, and the culture is very positive, and I feel they could kind of do away with committees and just move towards.
I think the start.
But maybe not organizations are like that. Maybe
No.
some will need some way of establishing a governance.
Yeah, but I think know what you're volunteering for. Say, this is our committee and this is our community. Which one or both do you want to be part of? But I think you find very quickly different people are drawn to different aspects. If you already have the committee focus and you're trying to move them across into community, take away all the power. Very quickly, those people that were excited to be part of a committee because we set standards and did governance, if you don't get to do any of those things anymore, and it's about learning, those people drop away, right? They disappear. And I think that's a key differential. I don't want to empower. People often talk about empowering these communities of practice. I don't want them to have any power whatsoever. Power is always influence. That's
but you said that you need to treat the output of them very seriously.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if they come up with what they think are great models to move forward, organisationally that has a lot of weight. That doesn't mean that what they produce has some kind of natural governance process to say, well, just because the community came up with it, that's the new coding practice.
So that would be in an organisation that has both. In a sense, that would be the input for the committee now to standardize, or maybe not.
Yeah, and often the committees are sort of architecture level, right, bodies. And again, certain type of people, certain type of experience are drawn to those, and they will take output from communities and decide, what makes sense on a very broad scale, because we're saying this applies across whatever our position of authority is.
But that could be quite discouraging for the community if their suggestions are kind of rejected.
You'll kill the community. If
Yeah.
you constantly don't lend any weight to their output, you'll kill the community in the sense of why are we actually putting these things forwards? But even a community that has no influence on the standards and governance, it can still exist if there is learning.
Yeah.
Within the standards and governance, I can still get better. I can still learn from my peers and understand where my particular area of specialisation is going. And so if you can build that culture, it's kind of why I say take the power away. You're not here to set the direction on this particular technology in the company. You're here actually to get better at what it is that excites you. And that way you remove the challenge to authority that always comes from this thing.
So thank you for that. As a comment, I see there that there is still a role for some form of, I call them Agile line managers, someone who is outside this scope and whose task is to balance that. Mm-hmm. So decide how much emphasis is put on community and how much standardization is going on, so that the goals of the organization as a whole are met.
I think someone needs to be making sure that communities exist, that communities have focus, that they have support where they need it, and obviously the other side is how do we maintain consistency where it's appropriate. So someone has got to be balancing those things. But communities won't form, they never form on their own.
Yeah.
And if all the support they're given is, we're going to give you a meeting room, then they turn into empty echo chambers very quickly. So it's a serious undertaking. It takes effort and continual investment of time and perhaps some kind of funds, but there's an enormous payback, both internally for the staff and I think externally for the organisation.
Okay. Thank you for that. I don't know when we will meet again, but it was a pleasure, and I hope you have found some inspiration in what Rob was saying. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks, Andy.